Thank you, everybody.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, got it. So I think we're good on that. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We're really excited that everybody is here to talk about the tiny home bill today. We've been having some conversations, and I guess first I think I have one of my co-prime bill sponsors. We're hoping to have
Rep Kip, I think you went on mute for a minute there.
Yeah, I'm off, but I'm sorry, Representative Exon, would you like to say hello to everybody?
Oh, yes. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm happy to join on this very interesting bill with Representative Kip, and I appreciate her asking me to join the force here. So good afternoon to everybody.
And also, I didn't see them on the call at this point, but Senator Janal and Senator Heisey are also going to be joining us on this bill. So that's where we are. But at any rate, wanted to just let you all know that we really appreciate your coming today. And we're going to let Eric and Mo take off and sort of describe the bill to you and go through it and take your comments. But I just want to say, you know, we are open to comments. We've actually been receiving some already and are going to be making some adjustments. But I think Eric and Mo will talk about that. I always tell everybody I'm only the legislator. I carry the bill. That doesn't mean that I know everything. So I rely on experts like you and like Eric and Mo to help us get through this process. So that's kind of where we are. So go ahead and take it away, Eric.
Well, hi, I'm Eric Freed. I'm the Chief Building Official for Larimer County. But I would not really call myself an expert on tiny homes. There are many people here on this call who really are experts on tiny homes in the industry. But the reason I'm involved is our commissioners and myself have gotten increasing requests to approve tiny homes over the years and asked what our regulations are for tiny homes. And as I think most people know, tiny homes fall between the cracks of existing state rules. They're not mobile homes, they're not modulars, they're not HUD homes, they're not really, well, some are built to RV standards. There is no national standard for tiny homes, although that's in the works. And so we can't really issue a building permit for a tiny home. If it's an RV, it's only supposed to be on the site for maybe 30 days. So the people want to live in tiny homes for more than 30 days. So my commissioners asked me, is there anything we can do to change state law to make this possible? And I took a shot at it through Colorado Counties, Inc. And in the process of doing that, began having a lot of discussions with Maulid Miskell at the Division of Housing and realized that I was kind of on the wrong track. But in the process of doing that, we've developed this, or Representative Kip has developed this draft bill to try to address tiny homes. The intent here is not to make them illegal because technically they kind of are illegal right now. I mean, there's no state regulations that really apply to tiny homes. So they're being built and put in, and people are hoping nobody notices or their neighbors don't see. There's some local rules that allow for tiny homes, but there is no statewide rule on tiny homes. So the idea was to try to come up with something that would allow for more tiny home installations, but also maintain public health and safety. Because I'm a building code official. I know there's other building code officials on this call. The last thing we want to do is put people in a house that's not safe. And so we need to know that it's structurally sound. We need to know that the wiring is safe. We need to know that the gas piping and the venting is safe. The plumbing is good, that you can exit in case of an emergency. With a normal stick-built house, we inspect all those things as you go along. But these things come to the site already built, so we haven't inspected it. The existing state rules for modulars and manufactured homes have some kind of quality control procedure in an existing factory. So some approved inspectors looking at those things and making sure they're safe. So we're trying to come up with something similar for tiny homes. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We already have a set of state rules for prefabricated structures. So the thought was to add the class of tiny homes, which is its own thing, to those rules and come up with some kind of way to regulate tiny homes. And that's the intent anyway. Both to allow for more tiny homes and to uphold public health and safety and consumer protection. So a real quick summary of the bill, in case folks haven't read it, mostly it's under Colorado Revised Statutes, Title 24, Article 32, Part 33, creates the class of tiny homes, defines a tiny home, It also defines an RV residence. And I should say right away, that's going to be coming out of the bill because that's been problematic for people. The intent there was that an RV is intended for temporary use, but we know people are living in RVs year round, especially park model RVs. So could we come up with a new class of basically an RV that's being used permanently that maybe could connect to utilities? But that was problematic for a number of reasons. And so RV residences is going to come out of the bill. So if that's your concern, it's kind of a moot point at this point. But tiny homes would be added to the scope of authority for the Division of Housing and the State Housing Board. Most of this bill is just adding tiny homes to existing rules. And there's two sections at the end. I'll tell you which are new. There's an existing state housing board, and I think the idea now is to add 2 tiny home reps to the makeup of that board, changing 1 existing rep so that board gets expanded to 13. Fees and funding are addressed on pages 12 to 14. Then you go into prefabricated construction certification, again, mostly existing, 14 to 16. Installation is page 16 to 24. Basically it'd be like modular homes where the tiny homes are built would have to be approved. The installers would have to be approved. The sellers would have to be approved. There would be fees to cover the cost of the program. Local installation standards preemptions on page 24, because if there's going to be state standards, you can't have every locality have their own standard. Then you no longer have any kind of state uniformity. There's a section in there on consumer complaints, on sales. And page 32 is a new section on tiny homes itself. I think that's 2432-3328. So I would read that if I were you. It does say the housing board shall promulgate rules establishing standards for tiny home manufacture and connection to utilities. You can't put everything in state statute because that's not a good way to do it anyway, because something changes, you have to go back and get a new law. So the broad outlines are in state statute, but then it empowers the board to adopt the rules and the nitty gritty for how to regulate the program. There's also the question of what do you do with, and in terms of a standard, I think people should know that there's a proposal that ASGM created tiny home standard, which we're hoping will get approved in the next month or so. And that's really the long-term solution. So there's some kind of standard for tiny homes. They get manufactured under some quality control program. They come out with some kind of state decal on them, and then everyone knows that this is a safe product. Then there's a question of what you do with tiny homes installed before there is a standard. And I think the date in there is July 1st, 2023. Is there some kind of amnesty program? Right now, the way the bill is written, it's permissive. It allows locals to require inspections of those existing tiny homes, doesn't mandate it. So in my case, I would like to look at the tiny homes that are already installed. I'd use procedures similar to what we have with our existing as-built permits for when someone does work without a permit. And along with that, it talks about having a master electrician, master plumber, and engineer look at the tiny home to at least see if they believe it meets those codes. And then pages 35 to 36 goes on to the other parts of state law that are not 24, 32, 33. It talks about the electrical and plumbing statutes and says that I can approve connection to utilities if I'm convinced they meet code, or after the standards go into effect if they meet the standards. Page 41 amends the Mobile Home Park Act to talk about tiny home parks or tiny homes in mobile homes. And then finally, page 42 says when the bill is effective. So as I mentioned, there's already some changes to the draft bill you might have seen that hopefully will clean up some of the problems. And the intent of this, again, is to make tiny homes legal, find a way to bring the industry into legal compliance with a regulatory regime that's already in existence pretty much, while upholding public health and safety. But we think there might be thousands of tiny homes in the state. No one really knows for sure because it's a largely unregulated industry. So that's all I'll say for now. I think Mo Miskell from Division of Housing may have more to add. And then the real point of this meeting is to hear your questions and concerns and comments. And, the bill can be amended. I'm sure it will be amended, can be made better, but, hopefully an amended version that meets everyone's concerns will pass, and it'll be more possible to have legal tiny houses in Colorado.
Great, thank you, Eric. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm having internet trouble, and that's why my camera is off. I see a few thumbs up, so that's good news. Hopefully if I start breaking up, I'll recover quickly. As I said, Eric, great job on setting the table. I've been in this position for 4.5 years, and I've got a couple of hats I wear, but the first one, the primary one that got me hired at Division of Housing was to regulate factory-built structures. And of course, the sale and installation of manufactured HUD code homes as well, in essence, helping the federal government with their product. And so those are two very different products. But we have a framework in place through our state program to ensure consumer safety and the ability of folks to be able to purchase those products and be assured that they're built to a code, whatever code is applicable to one of those products, and make sure that they're obviously installed, that they're being installed on a foundation, that that installation is appropriate, et cetera, et cetera. So we have this framework that already exists. And so the idea is to plug in the tiny home model into that framework. We're not saying it's the same thing as a HUD code manufactured home. We're not saying it's the same thing as a modular IRC home. It's its own thing. And of course, we're excited to see what happens nationally with regard to creating a code for this type of home. But the idea is to plug it into this framework that already exists instead of creating something from scratch. And by doing that, obviously you have economies of scale, right? You don't have to start something that doesn't exist. You're just plugging into something that already exists. You're just making sure that whatever you plug in is refined to be specific to that industry, that population, and of course, being able to react to what its needs are. So we have a robust process in place. It's been around for decades. Some of you may be familiar with it. Some of you, this may be very new to you. I'd be more than happy to have conversations about the current structure for how we regulate manufactured HUD code homes and how we regulate IRC modular homes through the state program. But it has been clear in the 4.5 years I've been here that folks have wanted something from the state. No one knows right now, until now, what that should look like. But they always thought we had jurisdiction over these things, and I've been explaining politely for 4.5 years. Unfortunately, even though you're saying it's a tiny home, what you're describing is not something that we regulate. How you described it, even Appendix Q from the IRC, as we've adopted, does not apply, because we're talking about a modular factory-built structure in that case. So anyway, this will bring a lot of clarity. It's still very much obviously in draft form. It'll be fine-tuned as we go through the process. As Eric said, one of the things that we try to capture, because we're all struggling with it, is what to do with those RVs and what the state statute refers to as a recreational park trailer, commonly known as the park model across the country. What to do with those? We all know those are not designed for permanent occupancy, but for whatever reasons, and of course the housing crisis in our state does not help, some of them are being utilized that way. So we were trying to come up also with a registration program to help local jurisdictions with that issue. But of course that has complications that we're not built to address. And so we're gonna probably drop that part of it, as Eric mentioned, and focus more on the tiny home parts that we're trying to clearly identify and create a program for. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. If you have any technical questions about the current structure for modular and manufactured home regulation, I'd be more than happy to answer those questions. And of course, how they may apply to tiny homes.
Great, thanks, Eric and Mo. And I do want to clarify one thing. We haven't, we're trying to figure out if we can add another member to the board, if that would be a reasonable thing to do. We're not talking about taking anybody out right now because, people who are on that advisory board already, a lot of negotiations have taken place to get them there. I'm sorry, Mo, did you want to address it?
No, yes, thank you, Rep. Kip. You just reminded me that there's one thing I did want to clarify, just to make a correction. The membership that we're talking about, the bill, is not the State Housing Board itself. The State Housing Board itself is a different entity. That's a 7-member board. And those appointments are based on congressional district. And that's the ultimate entity that has this decision-making authority in the context of rulemaking. What the bill and the law currently has in place is an advisory committee to advise the State Housing Board by providing recommendations on what codes to adopt. That current committee we call the Technical Advisory Committee, or TAC, is a 12-member committee made up of different people from industry. And that's the one we're looking to add tiny home representation on, not the actual board itself. So I hope that clarifies things.
Yeah, thank you. And so we are trying to figure out how all of the members of the board, people are on that board because we need to have representation from various sectors. So that's going to be a little bit of negotiation to figure that out. But we have heard the request to have additional tiny home representation, but just don't want to promise anything right off the bat because we don't know for sure. So anyway, with that, I'm sure there are questions and comments and concerns and everything else. So I just wanted, if you wouldn't mind, if you look down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see something that's labeled reactions. If you raise your hand from there, that's great. Or if you can't figure it out, just yell or wave, and I'll try and see you doing waving so that I can get you on. But it looks like we have a couple people. So let's go with first Robin and then with Shay, okay?
Yes, hello, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Robin Butler. I'm the founder and CEO of NOAA Certified. We're an inspection and certification company for tiny houses on wheels. And I represent over 200 plus builders across the nation that are currently building tiny houses. Wanted to ask a question. I'm concerned about the inspection process for factory built houses and manufactured homes. Concerned that it might stifle the creativity of the luxury custom home builder, the trade schools, and the owner builders. These are the ones that the tiny house movement has been built on. And if there is a very, and probably Mr. Miskel, if I pronounced your name correctly, you could tell us what the current inspection process is, would be to get a certification or an insignia. I know in Florida, eyes have to be on 75%, California is 100% of the build. And so my question is, would it be possible to create a second path to obtaining an insignia that would be as good or better than the current path that you use for factory built and manufacturers homes, that would make it easier for a smaller tiny custom home builder or a trade school or a owner builder to get that insignia? And what I'm referring to is the inspection process that we've been using for 6 years, where we inspect the home just like it was a site built house. We inspect each and every home at the stages of construction. Eyes are on 100% of the build. The inspection is done virtually and recorded, and then the file is securely stored. So we can go back when you're talking about grandfathering in or getting people that have already built houses. Have they been has a master plumber or a master electrician or an engineer, a structural engineer or a fire marshal taken and inspected or approved it? One way would be to go back, if it's a NOAA certified tiny house, then we could provide those files for that for the municipality building department, and I'd be happy to share our process with the board or the for an alternative path that we could get insignias.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. And please call me Mo. My name is Molid Miskell, but I go by Mo. It's much simpler.
All right.
Pronunciation of my first name doesn't match the spelling, so I'll make your lives a lot easier. And it's Mo, just M-O, just nice and simple. And I'll put it here in the chat here in a minute. I was typing away in the chat, so I heard my name. But anyway, I've never, and I've only been here 4.5 years, but I've never heard a manufacturer, whether it be a modular manufacturer or a manufactured home manufacturer, say anything about stifling their creativity. Obviously, a HUD code home is a different product. It's designed to be a lower cost product. And so, of course, creativity is actually stifled by the feds, not the state program, right? And they do that for a reason, to make the product more affordable. And so the way we look at it, and as you can tell, our office is housed within Division of Housing. And if you look at the mission of Division of Housing, it's about affordable housing, right? But at the same time, we recognize.
Mo, could you address the process for inspection and certification of the factory built? Not so much. My concern is the smaller custom manufacturer, if they have to go through a process of inspecting the manufacturing plant and then having eyes on from a third-party provider or an approved third-party provider, eyes on whatever percentage of the build, they would have to come to the site at different phases and different stages in order to inspect that. So if you're building 100 homes a year, obviously that would be easier than if you're building 10 homes a year. And that's what I'm concerned about, is the guys that have been creating these wonderful products. They wouldn't be able to afford the type of inspection process that the factory builds have.
Yeah, sorry, Robin. I heard a couple of concerns. I was just addressing them in the order I heard them. But if you want to skip to that one, I'm more than happy to do that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were finished.
No, no worries. I wasn't, but that's fine. Anyway, going to your more recent question, thank you for clarifying what the priority here is once again, we don't differentiate between the products, right? We don't say one is better than the other, right? And actually, this actually dovetails what I was trying to say earlier, is we want to provide adequate, safe, code-compliant products to our consumers, right? And we want to create a system that treats them equally as far as access to efficient government oversight, right? So the plan review so if we create something that's better, right, we want to see it better for everybody, not just tiny homes, right? So I don't envision a process where a tiny home product gets treated differently from our state modular program. They get treated differently, they're different codes, right? But the plan review is the same, right? We make sure we will go through it exactly like we would with the modular home, right? We would accept whatever we accept for the modular side. For the tiny home side, if we create something different that we apply to both, if we think it makes sense and improves the process for both, right? Same thing with inspections. So to give you an example for inspections, we obviously don't fly personnel across the country to inspect all the factories that send modular products into our state, or for that matter, other countries that send modular products to our state, right? So we work very closely and rely on third-party inspection agencies that already exist and build those relationships for them to do that. They get hired by those manufacturers to operate in their facility, whether it be small, medium, or large, right? But in essence, they are our eyes and ears. They actually work for us, even though they're being paid by the manufacturer, right? And that model exists in every state that I can think of, right? They're not all sending out their personnel to inspect these. So just rest assured that'll be the same here. If the factory is in Colorado, and I shouldn't use the term factory, I should say manufacturer, as I was telling Dan in an earlier call today. For the modular side of things, for example, you could have one person building a modular home once a year in his or her their backyard, right? That is a registered factory in our modular program. It could be a school. I'm proud to say one of the first schools that was building modular homes in the country is from the state of Colorado. I think it was a Loveland program. That program has grown and spread to other schools in our state and across the country. So we have schools manufacturing modular homes, right? And then of course we have different size plants and factories doing the same thing in Colorado, outside of Colorado. So this would be the same. It doesn't matter what size you are, you would be approaching a system that treats you the same as everybody else. We prioritize all of your work, right? Because at the end of the day, we want to get housing needs addressed in our state, right? And you're all going to have different products. It's going to be up to the consumer which product is more appealing to them, whether it be a HUD code manufactured home, whether it be a tiny home built to hopefully a national standard here in the near future, or whether it be a modular IRC home, right? The consumers will dictate that. But we want to make sure we have a process in place that's equitable to all, and fair to all, transparent to all, easily accessible by all. So that's our goal. We treat you the same. And if you guys have ideas on how to make that process better, we'd be all ears.
Yeah, I'd love to talk with you offline a little bit about what the process is in Colorado. And obviously Noah would be want to be a part of all of that. But my concern is, like I said, that the cost of the process, what would that be as opposed to, to a large manufacturer that builds a lot as opposed to somebody that builds 1 or 2 or 10 a year. And that would be a function of the third party, I'm sure, that you would be coming out there. But obviously, if they would have to fly if it has to be an in-person inspection. And would you entertain remote inspections? I know a lot of states are going that way.
Yeah, I think with remote inspections, I'll go backwards here. The remote inspections, it just depends on what you're inspecting, right? Some things are conducive to it. Obviously, technology is an issue. We do inspections across the whole state. I don't know if you had a chance to travel across our state. I don't know where you're located, but we have some very, very rural parts of the state where technology is not going to work. You have to be in person. And so it just depends on what the particular product is, what is being inspected. Have we seen it before? This is something we're very familiar with. In the plant setting, obviously a different story. Technology may not be an issue. We could easily see it. If it's the same thing you're building over and over again, and we're familiar with it, then obviously we can consider doing remote inspections. And of course, like I said, third-party inspectors may have some remote aspect of theirs that we feel comfortable with. Just depends on how developed it is. And I can go on and on. With regard to the, and I forget the first point you made, sorry. I shouldn't have gone backwards. Or the first question you had. Oh, sorry, I remember now, for the cost. So for now, for an example, and I'd be more happy to drop in the chat, all our rules, right, for modular construction, we adopt through the State Housing Board through a very formal, robust process, right? And I told Dan this earlier, that starts first and foremost with stakeholder engagement. Before we even propose anything, we tell stakeholders what the issue is, get their feedback, and then we propose something. And it goes through a very rigorous process of stakeholder engagement, then a formal process to the State Housing Board. The reason I'm bringing this up is because one of our rules has all our fees, all of them, right? So it's very transparent, has all the fees. And one example of a fee is our plan review fee, which is done on a square footage calculation, right? And since we're talking about something less than 400 square feet, it will be cheaper than the rest of the stuff that we review, right? It may be just as complicated, but it'll be cheaper because we charge per square foot, not on how complicated it is, right? So I'd encourage you to look at the fees, but these are all things that are down the road, right? The bill itself is not specific to the fees. Of course, it addresses the rulemaking process and the technical advisory committee that advises the board, and fees would be discussed at that level, and you would all have input in that process. But all of that will be down the road if a bill is passed and this program is part of our state program. But all of that is there for you to see. I will share with you our website. You can look at our administrative rules that already exist for modular products. You can look at the fees that are included in there for modular products. You can get an idea of what you're looking at. It may not be the same thing for your industry. We'd have to figure that out as we're building the program.
Thank you, Mo.
Great.
Just as an FYI,
Well, we have a lot of questions, so if we could wrap this one up, that'd be helpful.
sure.
Thank
Just as an FYI, we've only had one of our manufacturers that was not able to make a connection, and since it was on wheels, he was able to come down the mountain and get his inspection done. So I'm going to jump off this and let somebody else talk then.
No, appreciate that. No, and thanks for bringing that up. We're going to go to Shay, and then we're going to go to Pete. We're sort of, I'll just tell you the order it is on my screen because it sort of puts you in order as your hand comes up, but it's going to be Shay and then Pete, Emily, Byron, Tracy, and then Art. So I think those are all the hands that are up. So we'll try and get to everybody. So go ahead, Shay.
That's great. Thank you so much. So kind of a big picture question. I'm with the city of Delta currently. I was with the Department of Local Affairs a while back. And when I was there, we created this document on guidance of tiny houses. So I can send you all a link if that's not fresh on your desktop. It's fairly old, but at the time it was like 2013 or 14, and we were having trouble figuring out in the community development office, what is a tiny house? Where does this go? So we put it in, it's an RV, it's a manufactured home, and we kind of categorized it that way. So I'm curious, what's the need to put this in its own different category, and why can't it remain as kind of either an RV or as a manufactured home and fit exactly into the program you have now, Mo? And what's kind of unique about this and helpful to everyone? So hopefully that makes sense.
It absolutely does, Shay. And I didn't realize you're formerly from DOLA. That's fantastic. And thank you for helping write that document. It does need some updating. As you mentioned, it is old. And of course, it will really need some updating if this bill passes. But the reason and as I mentioned earlier, I think I mentioned it, that I've been getting calls since I first started 4.5 years ago about what can you do about this, whether it be inspectors from the Department of Regulatory Agency, the electrical and state plumbing boards, but most of it being from local jurisdictions, right? We don't know what to do with this. Can it fit under your state program? And the short answer is no, they don't fit into the state program. There's actually 3 buckets here that we're talking about when I talk about tiny homes. There's actually the 4th bucket too, of course, site built. But I'm talking about off-site construction, right? With off-site construction, we're talking about 3 buckets. One of them is the RV and the recreational park trailer, also known as a park model, right? And that is regulated in state statute, but there is no oversight program. And those units are supposed to be recreational, seasonal, temporary use, right? That's what it says in the state statute. So anyone technically not using it that way anyone not using it that way is technically violating state statute, right? That's one bucket. So that's on the extreme end of the spectrum for this conversation. On the other end of the spectrum is the modular, the IRC, the what we call it factory-built residential structure in our statute, also known as a modular home, right? And that is a product that is clearly in the state program, the one that I currently oversee, right? And that is built to the codes adopted by State Housing Board. We are currently on the 2018 IRC. We've also adopted Appendix Q, which addresses tiny houses, not tiny homes, tiny houses. That's the term they use, right? Because we felt the only thing we can do with regard to this type of product is address the tiny house that's less than 400 square feet, going on a permanent foundation that's being built to the IRC. That is already addressed in our program, right? Then we have this 3rd bucket. So you got on the left, the recreational vehicles identified in state statute, but left up to industry to self-regulate. On the very far right, you got modular homes. Some of them maybe less than 400 square feet. If they have to be on a permanent foundation. Appendix Q applies. Then you got this big group in the middle that nobody knows what to do with, and the state program does not account for that. So there's a big hole, if you will. And that's where local government and DORA especially have been saying we need help. And that's why this bill is being proposed.
Thank you. Let's move on to Pete.
Yes, good afternoon. Hi, Mo. Good to hear your voice, even though I can't see your face. Am I coming through?
Yes, you're breaking up a little bit for me, but that could be just on my end.
Okay. So there's I have several questions, but let's deal with
Is this Pete, by the way?
I'm sorry?
Is this Pete?
Pete
Oh,
Lamar.
yeah, I see now. Yeah.
You owe
Sorry.
you owe me a call back.
Sorry, this bill is taking over my life.
I can appreciate that. For the benefit of the group, I've got the first code compliant tiny home community in the state in Woodland Park. We've been operating it for 8 years now without any difficulties with code compliance, with anybody living in tiny homes, park models, recreational vehicles, and a few mobile homes. It seems to me that we have Riva and we have Ansi. And, you know, if you're trying to bring the small mom and pop people into compliance, it would seem better to me, rather than setting up a whole new state organization to monitor and inspect and everything else, is to have those homes be compliant with those standards. We don't allow any units into our community that aren't either Riva, Ansi, or NOAA compliant. They have standards, and on the Riva side, these standards were established in an agreement and a settlement between HUD and the manufacturing businesses, because they were building, you know, larger park model homes than 400 square feet, and HUD didn't like that. So, you know, to me, it seems like you're trying to invent a wheel that doesn't need to be invented. And you know, I'm not certain that a tiny home, at least a tiny home on wheels of Tho, is any different than a Winnebago as far as connections and everything else. Our homes plug into pedestals just like RVs do. They hook into the sewer system just like RVs do. They hook into the water system just like RVs do, whether they're permanently or short term. And so what you end up having is you're trying to establish rules, so every time somebody moves their tiny home into a new community, you're going to send the state inspector out to inspect to make sure that they've got their hose connected correctly, or their power outlet hooked up correctly. It makes no sense. What you're doing is totally contrary to the whole movement. Most people are doing this because of the rising cost of housing. And part of the rising cost of housing is regulation. The more regulation you put on things, the higher the cost. So again, I'm struggling with having another state agency inspect something that's already allowed for by national, federal regulators. We have inspection and compliance through the factories that we use anyway. So I'm going to quit pontificating here for a second and just ask a couple questions. One, how do we get access to the draft bill? Hello?
We did send that out. We can just send me a request and we're happy to put it out. I'll put my email in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Are you going to require the same thing of all RVs?
So, Pete, I think it'd be easier we go back to some of the things you said earlier, and I'm sure Nick from Rivia and the tiny home community have a lot to say in response to some of the things you just said. First, and just, you know, we tried to address RVs in this bill. That's going to be removed. Just know that. So anything to do with RVs is gone, right? And same with park models, other than to say they are not tiny homes, which goes back to the premise that you first raised. And I know it gets confusing with the term tiny home out there. People use it for all sorts of things, right? For the context of this bill, it does not include RVs, nor does it include recreational park trailers, also known as park models. It excludes them. So we're not talking about those products at all.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Mo, do you mind if and Representative Kip, do you mind if I just clear up a few things here? I think, you know, being from RVIA or RIVA, RV Industry Association, whatever you want to call us. First and foremost, the federal government does not regulate RVs at all. In 2018, HUD came in and completely removed RVs from housing based on the standards that we built to. So the federal government actually has no oversight over the industry anymore because of their ruling then. Furthermore, the industry itself doesn't build housing of any sort. What we build are recreational products. We try to make it as clear as day. In fact, the 2018 ruling from HUD forces the manufacturer to put a notice into the park model that specifically says it's temporary, recreational, and seasonal. And they have to either be handed to them by, if they go to a dealership in some state, or whichever way the person or consumer purchases that. Furthermore, both NFPA 1192 and ANSI A119.5 also reiterate that they are for temporary, recreational, seasonal. No product that comes out of, or I don't want to say nothing, but actually, no, I could say this right now. No product that would come out of any of my manufacturers' factories, OEMs factories, or have an RVIA seal on it and be considered a park model, or be considered a traditional 1192 RV, which is going to be an overwhelming majority of the industry, would pass a building code inspection on the merits of the structure itself, for the simple fact that it's on wheels right now. And no, from what I understand, there's no building codes around the country that do that. So I think it's really important to clear that up for everybody. And I'm also happy to talk with anyone. I put my information in the chat. And please reach out to me if you do have concerns over RVs and you would like some help with clarification on it as well. But furthermore, I do think that this is 100% correct way of moving for the tiny home industry. It is something that's different, for the simple fact that they are being developed and designed to be lived in full-time as housing. That's not what my manufacturers do. We don't do that. 1192 doesn't enforce that. ANSI A119.5 doesn't enforce that. So there is a safety aspect to this, that if you're allowing people to live in these full-time and they're not built that way, there's something there. So I don't mean to take time, but I think it's just a very important clarification. I'm happy to answer any more questions too from anyone. Like I said, my information's in the chat. Feel free to hit me up on the email and I'll try to answer your questions as well. So.
And thank you for clarifying that. I don't know, Eric, if you wanted to address the part where, we can't really permit these people right now. Maybe that would be helpful. And then we should move on so we get everyone's questions answered.
Yeah, I'll be real quick so people can talk. To me, a tiny home is different than an RV. That's the whole point. It is a separate creature. And an RV is supposed to be temporary and a tiny home is supposed to be permanent. So there is no way to, well, you can permit a tiny home built on site with everything inspected as it goes along. 99% of tiny homes are prefabricated. They come to the site. And so we can't inspect them and we can't permit them. So we're trying to find some way to permit them so people could put them on some kind of permanent foundation, maybe not concrete in the ground. We're trying to be creative with what's the permanent foundation, so they could live in them for more than 30 days legally. So that's what we're trying to do with the bill here.
Yeah, and right now we don't feel like there's a way to do that legally and safely.
I don't think there is.
So yeah, I hope that answers your question. And if you want to chat more, I just want to get to the rest of these questions as well, but happy to chat about that more. If anybody needs further follow-up, we're totally happy to do that. We will make sure that you just reach out to me and I'll make sure that we hook you up with whoever you need. Emily, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. So my name is Emily Heisel and I'm with Copper Key Tiny Homes over on the Western Slope. And we are working with Garfield County, who already adopted Appendix Q, but we're also looking to add mobile homes, or not mobile homes, mobile tiny homes, and create a tiny home community here. And really, I have to say I agree very much with the gentleman from NOAA and Pete on quite a few of the things that they brought up. The piece that really sticks out in my mind is we're trying to help and cater to people that are industrious and are building homes on their own. And the less red tape, the better. The less amount of money they have to spend, the better on inspections and that such. So I absolutely believe virtual inspections are a great way to go, as well as allowing the local municipalities to be inspectors, because that's something that we're working with, like I said, Garfield County to potentially do. Beyond that, I want to really talk about, like, there's a date in there right now talking about homes that were already built before this bill comes out. And I would like to see a longer time frame. As a builder of a home myself, my husband and myself before, I know it takes a long time to build, especially if it's your first time or something like that. So if somebody just is starting out, they may not get it done in time, and then have to basically scrap the home. And my biggest question to you is, for somebody like myself who's currently working through putting in a community, working with the municipalities and everybody here, there's so much that goes into that. If we get to the final stages of this and then have to scrap everything because of this new legislation, that's just a killer. Like, how are you going to account for people that are pushing forward right now and still allowing them to make things work with this new legislation? Is there a grandfathered in type scenario for communities as well?
Mo or Eric, would you guys like to address that, one of you?
I'd have to look in the bill. I know there was something about mobile home communities, but you know, if that date is too short, it could be discussed in committee and in hearings that maybe that date needs to be extended. You know, maybe something that could be determined to not be installed by that date, but was under construction prior to that date would, you know, fall under the different regulations. But I would like to say that that section is more permissive. If you read the section, it says that a local government may require the inspection of a tiny home not manufactured in accordance with these standards. I don't believe it requires the local government to do that, but I'm not sure you could connect a tiny home to utilities unless it was approved by local inspector or DORA. So that's a good point. It's something we can, you know, maybe take a look at. The other thing I would just say is if people have specific ideas for how to improve the bill, I know the bill sponsors are open to that, but they would like, you know, you to write something down, say, hey, why don't you change the language here to this, and it could be looked at.
Yeah.
And you know, oh, go ahead, Matt.
Oh, you go ahead, please. You want me to go? Okay. Yeah, my perspective is, you know, the way it currently stands, it's up to local government, right? And we have a date certain identified in the bill. It's July 1st of 2023. At that point, the state program kicks in, right? So everything between now and then is really left up to the local government. That's how it's been for years, right? So that wouldn't change. And so if you're planning, you would just be planning for the date that's in the bill, which is a little less than a year and a half from now. I would hope that would give somebody plenty of time, but if it doesn't, then obviously you could talk to Representative Kip and maybe a different date would come up. Me personally, right, the further the date is out, the better it is for me. It gives me more time to build something, right? The initial draft of this bill was a date much sooner, which gave me heartburn and anxiety, right? Because I got to build an effective program in a short turnaround time. And so I think that could be talked about, but the reality is at some point in time, there has to be a cutoff, right? At some point you have to transition from what we're trying to get away from to what we're trying to get to. And that date right now is July 1st of 2023. If you have a better date in mind, by all means, share it.
Okay. Yeah, I get that there has to be a date there. I would just like to see that farther in the future for those that are building currently. And I don't know if either of you really addressed the tiny home community piece of that, because I believe that is important, that if we're doing all this work and we get something built and people are living there, I don't want to see any repercussions for those people that we're following all the rules, we're working with our municipalities. I don't want to see the bottom fall out.
Well, if I could just say, that's certainly not the intention of the bill. The bill is to allow people to live in tiny homes legally and safely. I think a year and a half is a reasonable deadline, frankly. And nobody's going to tell you to scrap your entire community. And presumably, you know, everybody here is pretty much a reputable home builder, tiny home builder. And I don't think you're going outside the lines if you are here. So I don't think anything you're doing is probably going to be too far out of there. But the fact is that we do want people to be able to have a legal way to live in their homes and to be able to do it safely. And that's all we're trying to accomplish with this bill. So just to put that out there. Byron, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. First, I'd like to really thank Mo, Eric, and Kathy. I think was mentioned, the bill sponsors are definitely open to our input. Yesterday, we gave you a lot of input, and I already see that you're changing things based on a lot of the input that was given yesterday. And thank you so much. It sure makes me feel better from when I first read the bill, as I mentioned yesterday. Something I'd like to mention is we may want to put a term in here, movable tiny homes, because tiny homes encompass on foundation. Many people think they're park models. Many people think, tiny homes are many different things. But I think what this bill is addressing is the term movable tiny homes. Tiny home industry associations are really working at using that term. So we're differentiated from just regular tiny homes on a foundation or anything. It might bring more clarity in the bill. Also, on the issue of committee members, you're thinking about trying to include some tiny people. I would like to highly encourage you to have tiny home builders on that committee rather than other interested parties that may not be near as involved or knowledgeable about what a tiny home really is and what the needs are for the rules and standards. So I'm not going to be long-winded because there's a lot of people who need to speak. And I want to thank you once again so much for hearing our concerns and actually being open to them. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you. And if you wanted to send some more information into us on the standard of movable, I think, we could certainly look at that. I think we're trying to go with temporary foundation versus permanent foundation. But, as I said, we're always open to looking at that. So thank you. Appreciate
Thank you.
it. Tracy, do you want to go ahead?
Hi, Kathy. So hi, everybody. It's Tracy over at Tiny Building Experts. To piggyback a little bit off of Byron, first of all, Kathy, Mo, and Eric, they did a wonderful job with those of us that participated yesterday. And as a builder, as a Colorado native, as a tiny home owner, even as a landowner here in Colorado, I looked at this from a lot of different angles. I do encourage everybody to read the bill. As Kathy said, she'll get that out to those of you that have not read it yet. What I gathered between all of our conversations, both with, offsite industry experts, as well as being on the call yesterday and today, reading the bill, I hear the team saying, hey, we want consistency at the state level. We want, houses built to code that are safe for consumers. And we want proper P&E, public or plumbing and electrical and proper connection to utilities. And I think those of us that are in the industry care about all the same things. So I feel like everybody's 100% on the same page and that we're all marching towards the same thing. This is actually pretty exciting. For those of, that are maybe a little bit newer, we've been working on this for many, many, many years and amongst lots of local jurisdictions throughout Colorado. And I don't blame the state for wanting some consistency. I'm sure you guys are getting calls every day about tiny houses. I mean, we send them to you guys to make sure that we are doing things to code and getting things set up correctly on the land and things of that nature. That goes to show you, like the development we're doing in Colorado Springs and downtown. That is properly set up with the utility company. It was approved through the city. We built the houses to code. So I think this is moving in the right direction. I guess the point that I'm trying to make is I don't think your good builders have problems with meeting insulation, snow load, a lot of that stuff we talked about yesterday, Eric and Mo. We're all on board with all of that, right? What our concerns are going to be transparency and cost, because that's what our industry is about. It's about affordable housing and, a little bit more than that. But long story short, as a builder, we want to be able to provide transparency to our consumers and keep our costs down. Many of us have already invested thousands and thousands of dollars into the codes that we're already building. So as a small business here locally in Colorado Springs, it's obviously vital to us to understand those costs. I think Mo or Eric, you said that you would post the fees, that you had the admin rules. So we're definitely going to be interested in that because as a builder, I want to know, well, how does it change my business? What kind of costs are going to be imposed? Because I need to prepare my customers for that, right? As a small business. So a lot of us, we care about the same things, but we don't want the red tape. And, we do want to do things correctly. I want my customers to not worry about where they're going to park, right? I want them to be able to know they can park legally because they are connecting to the septic and the sewer correctly, or the utilities or the water. So for the most part, like I said, I think one of our biggest concerns as a team collectively, as I'm talking to all of my peers in the industry, is we just want transparency in the costs as well. And we don't want to make it harder than it already is. We want to build the code. We want everybody, that's fine that we have the registry. That's all okay. We want consumers to be protected, but we also want to be protected as builders and want you all to take into consideration the investments we've already made. And then the last thing I just want to mention is we're going to have to talk more about the RV thing, because are we saying that a tiny house that's built to NFPA and is considered an RV because it is roadworthy and people are traveling in it, are we saying that they cannot park it according to this state bill because it is labeled an RV? I know we're going to need some more clarification on that.
No, I don't believe so. And I believe there was one small piece. Eric, did you want to address what that one small piece is that you were thinking of leaving in, and just run it by folks real quick?
Yeah, I think there's probably differences of opinion here between people who want to include RVs in the bill to live in permanently and those who don't. And I know a lot of tiny homes are built to the current RV standard, but I think the RV industry folks think that you can't put that in the bill because it'll make it too problematic. And there's other problems with state law as well. You could always, it's up to local zoning authorities if they're going to allow an RV to be lived in for more than 30 days. You just can't give it a building permit and a certificate of occupancy because it's not a building. But there was something in the bill that I wanted to keep in there, which was basically to allow RVs to be connected to utilities potentially, so they could live in there permanently, meaning more than 30 days. They would already have to have an RV type extension cord to an approved electrical pedestal. You'd have to have the sewer hookup. You'd have to have the water and gas hookup. And I've felt that as a local authority, I can't approve that because Division of Regulatory Agency says I'm not allowed to approve them for connection to utilities. So if there's some way to keep that part in state law, which I think is on page 34, that says that I can do that. I'm not in violation of state law to allow for that connection. I would like to keep that in there, but it would take out this new definition we were playing with of an RV residence, because that seemed to be problematic for a lot of stakeholders.
Thanks, Eric. And I'm going to go ahead and let people respond to that after we get to the other two questions, just because I do want to make sure that we get everybody, and I want to be recognize everybody's time. I'm happy to stay on as long as anybody needs, but I don't know what everybody else's schedules are. So Art, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, hi, thanks very much. My name is Art Lawwell. I'm representing 3 different organizations today: the Colorado Tiny House Association, the Colorado Tiny House Festival, and Einstein Tiny Homes. And I have a couple of very brief questions. My first question is, can you please define what a manufacturing facility is?
Mo or Eric, would one of you guys like to take that? Mo, go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. I think I mentioned it earlier. We view it as anything that's off-site, right? It could be somebody's backyard. It could be a schoolyard. We've even had it in a prison yard. So anywhere where somebody's building a product that we're regulating, we consider that site to be the manufacturing plant, if you will.
Okay, one of my next questions is regarding, there was some verbiage in the bill, the copy of the bill that I had received, about the approved plan. So obviously I know that some manufactured home builders and HUD approved home builders are operating on a approved blueprint through some sort of jurisdiction, whether that's federal or state or local. Is there going to be a requirement that the plans to which a builder is building to be approved, filed, maybe even created into a model? And where would that be done? And is that something that's a part of this process as well?
Yes, that's another great question. It would be just like we treat the modular industry. Before anything is built, it needs to be submitted on the design and construction plans have to be submitted to us to make sure they're building it to the codes that we've adopted, right? In the case of modular home, that'd be the 2018 IRC, right? In the case of a tiny home, it'll be whatever the industry comes up with, and if it's not able to come up with whatever the state housing board comes up with, right? So first and foremost, that's a starting point. We got to make sure what they're building will be ultimately acceptable. And in order to do that, we got to make sure they're starting off on the right foot by planning correctly. And once we've established that they have the appropriate plans, we'll approve it, and then construction can begin. And after that, we get into inspections and ultimately the goal being certification, so the home can be occupied.
Okay. And then I have two last other brief questions. Number one, how do you intend on handling builders that are building from out of state? There are obviously some very large builders. Some of them are producing a dozen or more homes a month that are not in the state of Colorado, but they may be building homes that are being sent to Colorado. So how are you intending on handling inspection and certification of homes that are not built within the state of Colorado?
Great question. Same as modular, right? We've been doing this for decades now. Basically acting as the eyes and ears of the local jurisdictions outside of their jurisdictions, right? So that's the whole point of the program and why it makes sense to fit tiny homes into it. So we, I think you might have missed the beginning of this. We obviously don't fly around the country or the world for that matter, inspecting these homes as they're being built. So we work very closely with third-party inspection agencies. Some of them work nationally, some of them internationally. We also work with other state programs. And so if another state has a similar program and they have the inspectors in place and are willing and able to inspect to our codes, and hopefully in this case, there'll be national codes, right? But if we come up with Colorado specific codes, then hopefully they're able to do it to our codes and are willing and able to do it, and we go from there. If the plant is in Colorado, we of course provide an option to utilize our own inspectors. But most of the manufacturers in Colorado, for example, actually use third-party inspection agencies, even in the state. Some do utilize us because they think they find us to be cheaper and sometimes more informative, if you will. But we leave that up to them. And so the same would apply here. We wouldn't treat this industry any differently.
Okay, and my final question is kind of around the DIY market. So I know that one of the goals is affordable housing, and one of the ways that's accomplished with tiny homes is people will build the entire thing or part of the thing themselves. So it seems from the verbiage of the bill that there has to be an approved manufacturer. So will this negate a completely or partially DIY built tiny home from being legal, air quotes, in Colorado?
I think just to make clear, we're talking about something built off-site. So if you are building your own tiny home on your land, that's going to be site built. That's up to the local jurisdiction. We're talking about you building something off-site and selling it to somebody somewhere else to be installed on site or placed on site, right? That's what we're talking about. If you're just building your own home, that's up to the local jurisdiction where you're doing that.
Well, I understand that, but I think we can all agree that no one is DIY building a modular home from, just their backyard.
No, that's incorrect, sir. That's actually not true.
Well, if we're talking HUD certification and stuff like that, these things, they're designed to be factory built from a manufacturer. So I just wanted to kind of get my bearings on whether this would.
Yeah, all right, we're talking about three different products. A HUD manufactured home is its own thing. It's built to the federal standards, and that's under the federal program. What we currently have in place in Colorado is our state modular program. And in that particular program, we have people who build one home a year, maybe one home every couple of years that they sell in their backyard. We have schools that build modular homes as part of their curriculum. We used to have, and hopefully we'll get this back, we used to have the correction facility building modular homes at the prison to help rehabilitate folks and give them training for when they're released. So we already have a variety of settings that are similar to what I'm hearing about in tiny homes that's already happening in the modular world. It's just a different product. It's just built to a different code and it's utilized differently.
Thank
Okay,
you.
wonderful.
And I appreciate everybody's questions. And we have one more hand up, so I'm going to go to that one. And I'm always, like I said, happy to stay on and chat more afterwards, but I want to make sure Mike Schmidt gets his question in. So Mike, go ahead and ask a question.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Really appreciate the effort that you, Eric, and Mo are doing to get this over the transom, and then the other state House representatives and Senate representatives that are on board to push this forward. It's a long and overdue, but I do think that we probably have a lot of devil in the details, if you will, regarding some of the county rules that are being promulgated and developed over the past several years, and then also aligning those with some of the city municipal rules for local jurisdictions. It's quite a mishmash in Colorado. We have been leading the way in the country, I think, in looking at tiny house, because obviously the industry's emerged from Colorado. We like to say that we're the home of the tiny house industry. There's probably some California folks online that would see that differently, but that's okay. That's a comfortable fight. But here's my two baseline questions. And one is, I heard a lot of mention about the foundations. I mean, I did post on the chat the 5 subcommittees that our ASTM standards committee that's pending will be pursuing. And that's obviously pursuing tiny houses on wheels, tiny houses on foundations, the certification process, the standards for tiny house communities, and microgrids. And a lot of the things that are coming up, and on some of the questions that I've heard so far, my biggest concern is, will the state of Colorado be favorable to tiny houses on wheels that can be affixed to a foundation through various strapping means or helical pile means in lieu of having to do a concrete slab build? Because a lot of the stick built tiny houses in a lot of the local jurisdictions have been mandating the use of a concrete pad, which obviously increases the cost for that installation, which also means that you're going to have a lot more extensive utility costs. One of the things that we've been looking at is how can we actually bring a tiny house on wheels into a backyard component or on a larger piece of property, and then secure that tiny house to the ground, meeting all of the wind loading, hurricane and local zoning requirements. This is one of the reasons why we like the term movable, but more specifically an adaptable tiny house, if it's on foundation, if it can be taken off of that foundation and put back onto a trailer. There's a lot of interesting innovations coming in the marketplace to do that. But will this Colorado bill be open to the idea of tiny houses on wheels that can be fixed into a foundation model? That's my first question. I have a follow-up after that.
I can jump on that if you want. If you look in the definition section, we tried to improve the definition of a permanent foundation versus a temporary foundation for that very reason, so that a permanent foundation does not necessarily mean concrete footing and foundation in the ground, but something that you could attach the tiny home to will resist all the snow and the wind loads. But then the whole point of tiny homes is people might want to move them, so then you could at some point detach it from the permanent foundation and move it somewhere else. So it's a lot better than the current, I think, definitions we have under state rules, and I think would take care of that.
Well, Eric, would it be possible to have a tiny house on wheels where you do not remove the tiny house from the wheeled trailer, but you secure the house on the trailer to the ground? Is that going to be allowed?
I think so, yeah. I mean, permanent foundation means a structure that will support the building from underneath, keep it firmly affixed to the ground, keep it from moving, and not be removed from the ground or building. So the foundation stays on site. But you could, yeah, the idea is you could take the tiny home on wheels and bolt it, or otherwise strap it down, or have helical piers or something.
Very good. Yeah, that's been one of the issues across the country, in different cities where, even in Spur, Texas, when they came up almost like 5 years ago, saying, hey, you could bring a tiny house in our community, but you got to put it on a foundation. No trailers allowed. And then obviously in Fresno, they said, yeah, bring it on. We want trailers all day long. So, there's been a lot of innovations at the local level to do this. And that moves me to my second question here. And I know because everybody.
Mike, do you mind if I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
You have to also keep in mind local zoning. This bill does not infringe on local zoning. And so there may be unique local zoning requirements you have to pay attention to. And so just keep that in mind.
That's a really good point.
They may say that's fantastic. It's under the state program. We're not going to accept it in this particular area for these following reasons. Right?
Yeah, and I think
We
one
have
of
the
the
same,
classic,
we have the same issue with HUD code homes and modular homes, right? So just
Right.
keep that in mind, and they may say we will allow it, but it has to be on a permanent foundation. I mean, they do that sometimes with HUD code homes as well, even
Yeah.
though that's designed to be on either or. The
Mm.
bill as currently proposes has that flexibility, but you're going to have to deal with local conditions as well.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting as we've been talking about people building a house and putting it on a property. And there's been a number of people on this call talking about tiny house communities. And this is one of the biggest areas of concern that our ASTM committee has, is to be able to address the development opportunities for multiple tiny houses on private property. We know that El Paso County back in 2017 came up with a really what they thought was a breakthrough announcement of 2 tiny houses on a 35-acre agricultural property. Well, guys, I mean, we can accommodate a heck of a lot more tiny houses on 35 acres. However, there's the 35-acre law in Colorado that has some restrictions about water and utilities and access and roads, and you can't subdivide it smaller than that. And one of the things that we're really going to be interested in pursuing is the density of tiny homes in tiny home communities. And this is one of the reasons why we're looking at that NFPA 1194 standard for RV parks and campgrounds. We're not advocating, hey, we want to keep building 100 or 200 unit tiny home communities, but we might want to be able to look at private property opportunities for 20 tiny houses that could be built in small communities at a far less cost, delivered quicker to the marketplace. But we still need to address what really is a giant black hole in zoning at the local level or state. And that's the difference between planned unit developments, which big developers use to build lots of houses, single family, all the way down to this 35-acre rule that says, well, why can't I put 20 houses on my property if I can solve all the safety, health, and water and electrical and utility provisioning issues? And that's why we'd like to look at microgrids. So my framed question, if you will we have enough time in 120 days to fully vet tiny home communities or microgrids, or will we need to be able to allow in the bill some test piloting and some pioneer preference opportunities to try and test out some of these things and still be able to have the ability to make it legal for people to occupy those homes? So, using pioneer preference strategies like the FCC does when they do experimental communication technologies, could we have some provisions that Colorado can lead the way in innovation and have some breathing room to test out some of these ideas? Because I really don't think in 120 days we'll have enough time to fully flesh out, all the things that the industry is looking for, but we can definitely get started and heading in the right direction. So those are my two.
If I might butt in and just say that, well, first of all, I'm going to just say, if anybody has come and you need to get going, totally understand that. I'll hang out for as long as anybody wants to chat, but please do make sure that your information is in the chat so that we capture it and are able to get back to you. But as far as the 120 days, we're already on day 15 of a 120-day session. These things go very quickly. We're not going to be, there's a lot of things that really just don't belong in statute, frankly. And we want to give our state agency and our local governments enough latitude to be able to respond to a changing environment. So really what the intent of this bill is to provide a broad framework to allow tiny homes to exist both legally, and then that would give people a way to live in them safely. Anything beyond that, I'll let Eric and Mo weigh in on, but the whole intent of the bill is not to micromanage, because if we micromanage everything, then what's going to happen is we're going to have to come back with another bill, and that's really not our
True.
hope.
That's true. You got it. Very good. Thank you, Kathy. That's great.
Tiny home villages or communities isn't really within this bill. That may be a whole other bill. It seems to be more of a local zoning thing. This bill is more about standards for tiny homes and building permits and that kind of stuff. So, and if you put it in this bill, that makes it a very long and complicated bill. And so that may be a whole other thing to deal with. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I know that's one of our county commissioners who's on the line, she brought this bill to us and said, we want to be able to do this, but we can do the land use stuff, but you need to be able to enable it so that we can do it. And so that's really the intent of this legislation. So I want to give anybody else a chance to chime in who hasn't had a chance to chime in, or if you want to respond to any of the comments that were maybe already made, but we were trying to get everybody's questions. I welcome those. I don't know if Mo and Eric are able to stay on, but for everybody else, stay or leave is works best for you, and I'll just hang out. Or did we answer every single question? I'm sure we didn't, but.
So, sorry, this is Stacy Decker. I'm a consumer. I'm purchasing a tiny house to be placed on the lot.
Welcome.
Yeah, I'm getting the Byron simplicity is building my home. Got the first pictures of the framing today. It's wonderful. And it's going to be placed on a lot in Walsenburg following local city guidelines. The only thing I would request personally is that whatever bill you put forth is that it makes sense for me, the consumer. The issue that I've got right now is that I'm not building a mobile home. I'm having a house built. It just happens to be small. It's in attainable housing. It's affordable for me. It's attainable for many people. And the only thing I would request is any kind of legislation put out there in any way, shape, or form is that it's readable and understandable by somebody like myself who would like to have a house built, put on a lot in a city somewhere that makes sense in a very realistic way. It follows the international building codes. It follows electric safety guidelines, plumbing guidelines, et cetera, et cetera. I have not had a chance to read this bill yet. I would love to. I would consider any tiny house out there built, personally, in any way, shape, or form, is actually just a home. Because it's a home, it should be considered a house. Just because it's on wheels does not mean it should not meet standard international building codes. How does this bill address that? How does the legislation address the simple fact that instead of on a permanent foundation, it's on a mobile foundation? That's kind of where the question is. It needs to be simple.
No, I understand. I don't know if Eric or Mo would like to answer it. I can give you my short, layman's answer. And first of all, every bill that is written in Colorado, they are supposed to be written in plain, ordinary English. I think the one thing that you will not get sometimes because of that, just because of the whole nature of the beast, is there's always some context and history that you might need to understand in order to understand the bill. For instance, like the mobile home oversight program is mentioned in this bill, and that's a whole nother beast unto itself, and that will be probably getting modified this year too. But yes, the whole intent of this bill is to make this homes, again, legal and safe to live in. And I think we're trying to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, frankly, in so many words. We just want to make things legal and safe. So I don't know if Eric or Mo wants to weigh in, but I'm not sure. I don't think we're at odds here.
Well, there's two differences, I think, with a tiny home on wheels. One is it's on wheels instead of a foundation, but it could be put on some kind of permanent foundation that's, ground anchors or helical piers or something like that, so that it will meet IRC codes to resist all the loads. I don't know that it would on wheels. The big problem I have is, unless I look at it as it's being built, or a city inspector or someone else, we don't know that it meets IRC codes. If it's prefabricated, right now it falls under the state program and it doesn't meet state requirements. So we're trying to find some way to make sure that the thing is actually built to the residential code. If it's built on site, as Mo said, it's under my jurisdiction. If it's built off-site and comes prefabricated, it's under state jurisdiction. That's the big problem we have that we're trying to solve, I think, for tiny home safety.
And if I can be clear, there are some communities who have felt empowered to authorize some of these homes. And then on looking at the law again, and when we brought up this, and we're saying, ooh, should we have done that? So we're trying to make it legal everywhere in Colorado. I hope that helps. Other thoughts, questions, concerns?
Yeah, quick follow-up question, Kathy, for Eric and Mo. I know the RVIA industry has a pretty rigorous manufacturer's inspection program where they inspect RV models on an ongoing basis and obviously give them their certifications and their insignias. The key is these are like large production companies that are producing the same model over and over again, and they obviously get their factory inspected and they get their design inspected. Is it possible that the state of Colorado is going to allow not small manufacturers, but say mid-sized to large tiny house manufacturers who produce a series of tiny houses? Maybe they have 4 designs and they have a facility that they build them in. If the 4 designs can be approved, and once they're produced and manufactured and signed off in terms of an initial plans inspection or a facilities inspection, would those tiny houses be approved sight unseen? You would not have to redo an inspection when it arrived at the location for installation. Is that possible?
Anything is possible, but we have to be practical about this too. Especially, I've only been here 4.5 years, and I can assure you, not everyone builds what they planned to build. Things just happen. And the local government is trusting us to make sure that what was planned is planned to the appropriate codes, and then what is built to the approved plans. And you'd be surprised by how many deviations we see. And so the idea is a system of checks and balances, but make no mistake, we want to make sure ultimately what we certify is built to what we said it's going to be built to. And so we will work with the builders, we will work with the third-party inspection agencies, we'll work with everybody to come up with a process that works best. But to simply state, once we've approved the plans, you can do whatever you want, I just don't see that working for everybody.
So Mo, what you're saying, Mo, is you want a cradle to grave approach where if a tiny home is being built by a tiny home manufacturer in their plant, you want to know about it in advance and who the owner is and where it's going to eventually end up. And you want to have end-to-end communications and inspection processes in between those 2 events. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct. You want to make sure somebody is checking in on it. And because at the end of the day, you're putting a Colorado State insignia on it, right? And that means
you know how that's going to impact the industry and the growth of the industry if that's going to be the process going forward. So I'm a little concerned about that, but maybe there might be some effective workarounds and some improvements to the process that we may.
Absolutely, and we can talk about it. Like I've said, this has existed for decades in modular. And we have small operators in modular, we have large operators, we have people building the same thing day in and out. We have people doing highly customized things. So none of this is new.
Yeah.
It's just a different code that we're talking about.
But I do know that if I go and buy an RV from an RV dealer, that I don't have to have any state agency inspect it. I buy it right off the lot and drive it away because that is pre-approved.
But keep in mind, we're talking about 2 different things, right?
I totally get it. It's just an analogy, Mo.
No, I completely understand, but I just hope people once again realize the differences. We're talking about something that's a recreational vehicle.
Yeah, we get it. We know the difference.
Okay, compared to permanent living.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And I see that Pete has his hand up again. Go ahead, Pete.
Yes, thank you. Is there a size restriction on a tiny home under this legislation? I mean, can you go up to 400 square feet or 399 square feet without?
I believe that's the number in the bill right now is defining it as 400 square feet. And Eric and Mo can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's up to 400 square feet.
Yes, a tiny home is defined as not more than 400 square feet, which aligns with Appendix Q in the residential code.
Okay, so basically it's the same size as what's permitted for a park model home.
So that I don't. Yeah,
but it's not the same thing. It's
No, I get that.
Park models can be larger than 400.
I don't believe they can, but rather than debate that issue, so they can go up to 400 square feet and they can be transported like a modular or a manufactured home. Now, within the bill, and again, I haven't had a chance to read it, do they have to be removed from their delivery device?
I don't, go ahead. Well, I don't believe there's anything in there. I mean, I think they could still be, they'd have to be somehow bolted to a permanent foundation to get a building permit, but I don't think they have to come off the wheels or the chassis that they're built on necessarily. Obviously, if they're transported on a truck, you're going to take it off the truck and set it down somewhere on the lot.
Sure. I'm certain you guys can wrap your head around where I'm going with this. You know, effectively, you're creating a framework for something other than a park model home. Is there a width restriction?
An existing width restriction in state law for the size of a vehicle that you can transport on the roads, and that's not changed.
Okay, so it's
I don't know the
16 foot.
number. Okay, you probably know that better than I do.
Yeah, it's 16 foot. And then as far as transportation, it can be, you know, up to, I would assume, 13.6 for height. Again, I'm just struggling with this concept. Basically, what you're doing is you're going to create, it may be a good thing, create an industry where people, tiny home manufacturers, will make park models that meet the state code. And the only place you'll be able to get them is within the state of Colorado, because other manufacturers won't build to that code. They won't be able to, they in all likelihood, they won't. And right now, there are no, my knowledge, there aren't any park model manufacturers in the state of Colorado.
Hi, Pete. I think I would encourage you to read the definition as proposed, and I think that will help provide some clarity. It specifically excludes park models. I would also encourage you to speak to Nick with Rivia. I think he can provide you from an industry perspective that might be more palatable than hearing it from a government perspective.
No, and I'm fully aware of Riva's position and what's happened in the industry with this type of home. What I'm trying to do is provide a like product to our customers to meet the requirements that your proposed legislation will mandate. So
the problem, though, Pete, is they're not like products. Right. One is designed for temporary seasonal use, recreational use. This one we're talking about, just to be clear, Pete, the product we're talking about right now that we're trying to get standards for is not for that type of use.
No, I understand that. But what I'm saying is I can build a 400 square foot, 16 foot wide home that looks exactly like a park model that meets your standards.
But it would be built, but it would be built to different standards. It would be treated like a recreational vehicle.
Correct. I mean, that's basically what you're doing is you're creating a different industry for the same thing. It just has to meet this particular standard. And so insulation, snow, electric, what have you, that's where it ends up.
I mean, we can debate definitions all day long. If somebody's going to build what you would call an RV to meet the standards of our tiny home bill, I don't know what I can do about that. I'm sure, Nick, did you want to weigh in? You're unmuted.
Yeah. So the real quick thing, again, I think you guys have done an amazing job in this piece of legislation, other than the RV residence piece, because there's many reasons we disagree on that, and I'm happy to educate anyone on that. Period. My contact information's in the chat. Reach out to me. Somebody already did. Hopefully we can connect after this. But the key difference here is that in the bill, it says tiny home means a structure that, and under 2, it is designed for use as permanent living quarters. RVs are not designed for that. That's the specific difference. So they're not trying to create something that's the same thing. And yes, they could look the same. Trust me, park models get confused all the time with manufactured housing, but inside those walls and the actual differences in the standards in which we have to meet, or the lowest standard, because that's what standards really are. Same thing with NHTSA, same thing with all different types of standards throughout the world. You could always build things more robust. Is that is going to be the major difference on it, is that my manufacturer's products are not designed for use as permanent living quarters. Park models, their main reason why they're around is, and I might have a campground partner on here who can go into this even more, is that they're made generally mostly going to be consumed by and purchased by campgrounds throughout the country, so that consumers can come in, they can have a campground experience on a temporary recreational seasonal basis. So again, just happy to help anyone on this call too. I want to put that out there, help educate anyone on standards. So I'm here. My contact information's in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, and I know Mitch Kraft has a question, so we're gonna let her ask it. And I think I found a way to stick a link to the bill in the chat that you can download. So I'm gonna try that. Go ahead, Mitch Kraft.
Thank you. I'm Amy. I'm the office manager at Mitch Kraft. I guess the question that I have is about the process of, so as a builder, currently in the state of Colorado, tiny homes are considered to be vehicles because they're on a chassis and they have a VIN. And because of that, technically, we are required to be an automobile dealer in the state of Colorado. And Mitch Kraft is. We've gone through the licensure. We have that surety bond. And we are also registered with the feds so that we can produce a manufacturer's certificate of origin. And on that manufacturer's certificate of origin, that's the document that you give into the county clerk to title your tiny home. On that document, there's a body type. And in that body type, we have been putting travel trailer, because that is the most accepted designation throughout the country for what a tiny home is currently. It's the easiest thing for a clerk in California or a clerk in Ohio or a clerk in Florida to look at and say, I know what this is, I can title it as that thing. So what my question is how is this bill going to change that process? If I'm already a dealer and a manufacturer, as you know, ordained, by the state of Colorado, how is this bill going to change what I do with that department with the state of Colorado?
And just for clarity purposes, when you say tiny home, since it's used so differently by everybody, what type of product are you talking about? What codes are you building it?
I'm talking about, it's certified by NOAA, so NOAA certifies it all the way from roadworthiness with NHTSA, which is a federal standard, all the way through the IRCQ code as a home on a permanent chassis. So it is on wheels and it's up to 400 square feet.
Correct, but you're not building it to the Ansi standards or the.
Yes, the Ansi standards are included right smack in the middle of NOAA's.
I can add some clarity to that, Mo. We have what's called an Ansi Plus standard that we publish on our website. Some of the insulation structure, moisture is a big problem in tiny houses because it's a tight thing and there's breathing and cooking and all of that. So we have what's called an Ansi Plus standard. It's the Ansi 119.5 seems to be what a lot of people are using around the country for that. We're really looking forward to some kind of a ASTM to come out with some kind of another standard, but we can inspect to just about anything. There are some places like Sitka, Alaska, and Lake Dallas, Texas, that require the tiny houses to be inspected to IRC. So we have ICC certified inspectors in plumbing, electrical, structural that can do that also. But it's mainly an Ansi product, but we plus it with some structural and insulation and those kinds of things.
Okay, so I think that helps provide some distinction here. So if you're building to the Ansi A119.5. In Colorado, you are building a recreational park trailer, also known as the park model. This bill does not apply to that, so there'll be no change there. If you are building something different that is made not for temporary seasonal recreational use, right? And you're calling it a tiny home, and if it meets that definition in the bill, this bill will change your life. So it just depends on what you're doing.
It's including, the certification includes all of everything that might be required. So it's including the Ansi and it's including the IRCQ code. They're trying to cobble together all those different pieces of what a tiny home is.
Yeah.
But
So
right now, really, it's an RV, it's a travel trailer, and that's what I put on my MSOs. So how is that changed with this bill?
But doesn't that also, because you guys create the trailers, so therefore you guys are a manufacturer of the trailer versus an organization, let's say, purchases an engineered foundation? Is that kind of the differentiation you're trying to get to, ma'am?
In the state of Colorado, if your customer purchases the trailer and then we take the trailer, we're considered to be a second stage alterer actually by the feds. So we don't change the VIN or make our own VIN. We use the VIN that is originally put on the trailer by the original manufacturer. And that's legal.
Right, and the MSO says travel trailer, correct?
Yep. It sure is.
So, I mean, the short of your answer is if you adapt your building and adopt and utilize the codes that will be adopted through the state program for tiny homes, and you meet that definition of a tiny home, you're going to be going through a much different process. You're going to be certified by the state of Colorado for permanent living. And that's going to have a distinction compared to a travel trailer.
But how is it going to be titled? That's my question.
That is a good question. Lori, are you on? She said she might join us. I asked somebody from our Division of Property Taxation, which is a sister agency. Now, I don't want you to quote me on this, but I did have a conversation with her about this morning. So as things currently stand today, right? A HUD home, right? A mobile home, pre-1976 mobile home, those for taxation purposes and titling are dwellings, right? But they're also built on a chassis. They're also wheeled down the road. They're put on a temporary or permanent foundation, right? But they're built to standards that treat them as dwellings. Everything else in Part 9 of our statute, right? When we talk about motorhomes, recreational park trailers, recreational vehicles, travel trailers, truck campers, fifth wheel trailers, camping trailers, all of that, they don't see as real property, right? Those are vehicles, right? This tiny home bill is going to create something between those two. You will now have a product, if you build it to those standards that I'm hoping come up nationally, you're going to have a permanent dwelling. They're going to see that differently. Now they're going to probably start treating you like they do HUD manufactured homes, like they do pre-1976 mobile homes. Does that make sense? Does that help answer the question? I'll make sure on the next call that we have with you guys that she's on there. She will do a much more eloquent job.
About that, just for clarification. So you're saying that dwelling taxes we pay to like our local county commissioners or wherever we pay our local taxes, right? For our homes that are considered a dwelling. Well, for tiny houses on wheels or RVs, currently folks pay taxes to the DMV, right? Like you said, it's a vehicle. So what I hear you saying is this is going to fall somewhere in between. Where customers going to pay their taxes to?
Yeah, I think this is going to fall more like the manufactured HUD home and the pre-1976 mobile home, where it's considered more of a permanent living situation rather than a recreational vehicle. So I think it's going to fall on that side of the line. And I think that's what she was telling me during the conversation this morning, but I do not come from that world. So don't quote me on any of this. but that is
And
my,
those are paid to your county assessor. I do know that much because
Yeah,
Apologies,
exactly.
you're absolutely right. The county assessor. There we go.
Yeah.
So am I not going to pay the county? Am I paying the county assessor or am I paying the DMV? Because I'd much rather pay the DMV.
Uh-oh, that's
It,
funny.
it
well,
depends. I mean, if the whole thrust here is people wanted to live in these permanently and not have them treated as a vehicle, but have them treated as a house.
Right.
So if it's a house, your city or county zoning is going to have to approve having more than one house on a property, unless the tiny house is the house. They're going to have to issue a building permit, give you a certificate of occupancy, and the property assessor is going to assess it like there's two houses on the property. Of course, one is very small, so therefore the property taxes paid on that house should be a lot less than a big house.
Okay.
But it can't
What
be
about-
both a vehicle and a house. I don't think.
But why? But isn't that how a lot of people are using these? Right? Like I have one. I can use it for traveling, just like an RV.
but it's
Right,
going
well,
to come, but it's going to come down to its design and construction. What's the design constructed for? Right?
Well, most of the time, these houses are actually exceeding NFPA 1192. They're actually being built to local building code as well as Ansi. So when you actually look at the construction of a quality built tiny house, even though it's on wheels, that's really the only differentiation. We're still handling snow load. We're still doing high insulation value. We're still doing proper framing, trusses, the structures there, double pane windows, like we're doing all the right things. It's just that
Correct.
some of us want to travel with it.
But none of that you just described is captured in state statute. It's a big glaring hole. It's a glaring hole for regulation. It's a glaring hole for taxation. It's a glaring hole for all sorts of things. And so this will provide that clarity that you're seeking. If you want to stay as a travel trailer, right? Just keep designing it to Ansi, right?
Got
If
it.
you want it to be a tiny home and be treated as a permanent living quarter, then you're going to want to build it to this new standard.
Oh, it makes
You-
sense. Thank you so
Well,
much.
Mo, welcome to the tiny home industry because we've been grappling with a lot of movable and adaptable issues. But I think Tracy, and with tiny building experts and Mitchcraft are bringing up really good points. And this is one of the reasons why we've been focusing on, this idea of a tiny home on a chassis or on a grid, basically the same way that mobile homes are put on large steel grids. If you build a tiny house at that grid or chassis, you may have the ability to put that tiny home and chassis on a movable trailer and attach it to that trailer. Then you'd be able to move it to wherever you wanted to move it, pick it up and drop it onto a temporary foundation. Now that's an ideal scenario for a tiny home owner, giving them maximum flexibility because, hey, listen, 3 years later, I sell my house or I've got an ADU in my backyard with this tiny house. I'm going to put it right back on my trailer and I'm heading to Florida. All right. So the idea is maybe one of the things that we need to look at is there's a pretty good opportunity to build tiny houses on chassis, just like the modular guys did, but have a way to affix them back on a trailer when you want to have a movable solution. So these are the areas that we've been wrestling with in our AST process, and hopefully we'll be able to come back with some really good innovative solutions because there's a number of vendors out there that are already starting to think this way. And all we have to do is to say, hey, can state, county, and local jurisdictions be willing to take a look at that? So just a comment.
I have a question that I want to ask. Sorry, this is Steve from Tumbleweed. Following up on what the lady from Mitchcraft asked when we were talking about how is it titled, this is a good question because as the lenders are going to look at this right now, they're titled in a specific way. If it's permanently attached to the property, does this become real property? And does that change the way that the loans on them happen?
I would imagine yes, because once again, it would just be like a manufactured HUD code home, right? That can be either on a permanent or temporary foundation. If it's on a temporary foundation, it's considered personal property from a financing perspective. Once you tie it permanently to the foundation, then you go through a process to purge that, and then it becomes real property. That's from financing. From a taxation purpose, it would still be considered real property, but that's a different conversation.
Yeah, it's real property, and probably it's a little bit confusing because I know, like in the mobile home world, for instance, most of the mobile homes that go into, say, mobile home parks are sold as chattel. They're not given like a regular mortgage. So there are a lot of broken things in the system that aren't working well, and this bill isn't going to fix everything. But we are just, again, trying to focus on our primary purpose, and there might be other bills down the road that can help us resolve those other things that aren't working as well as we'd like them to in the system.
Yeah, hey Mo, maybe you can answer this. Is Nick from RVIA, and maybe I can hopefully shed light on some of this for everyone. What Mike Schmidt has talked about tonight, I think, is very important for everyone to understand that ASTM standard, because Mo, correct me if I'm wrong, as soon as there is some national standard, you could adopt that, which could give overall guidance to the entire tiny home industry here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it would just be like, the ICC, IRC, right?
Yeah.
And so every jurisdiction has that to go to. We would love to see a national standard for us to go to, right? And then through our process, right, our rulemaking process, we may adopt that as recommended, as perfectly articulated on a national level, or just like we do with the ICC codes, right? We may adopt it and have some amendments that we think are important to include. So it just really depends on what is produced nationally and how the industry reacts to it. And especially the stakeholders in Colorado, more importantly, how they react to it as well.
And if I can just say, that's sort of the difference between us micromanaging things in statute and then allowing the agencies to make their own rules and the local governments to make their rules, right? We try and establish a framework that hopefully we can get there in, and then, the state sets a level, and then the local government set their own level above that. It's sort of, floor to ceiling kind of thing. So I hope that helps. Okay, I don't see any other questions. I really appreciate your time. We're more than happy to engage. If you guys have specific things that you want to make sure yeah, but let me say this. If you want to make sure that you email me, if there's anything that you want to make sure that we look further into, please feel free to do so, and I will pass those comments along. I'll put my email in the chat, and looks like Janet wants to speak up. So go ahead, Janet.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No problem.
All the questions that are not answered, that we're all trying to figure out, is why we are doing a new committee with ASTM, and the entire industry is invited. No one is left out, and the timing of this bill is incredibly matched up with hopefully getting our committee approved. So all these questions that everyone has, where do we register it? What do we do? These are the same questions that we're all going to try to figure out together. And I just welcome everyone to join us. I did put my information on the chat, and we'll just figure it out together. Everyone is welcome. Thank you.
Well, thank you again. Again, if you were on this list, or if you got a direct invite to the email, you should be getting further notices as we go forward. And I really want to be respectful of everybody's time, and I don't mean to keep Eric and Mo here all night. It looks like, Pete, do you have one last question?
Yes, thank you, Kathy. Just real quick, RVs, tiny homes, anything that has a vehicle registration to it is sales tax. We collect sales tax on those homes when we sell. What do you anticipate being the taxing structure if it is a tiny home going on a permanent foundation? Or if it's a tiny home that's going on a permanent foundation and can be subsequently moved to a different location? Thank you.
That's a Mo question. I don't really have any expertise about titling and state taxes and stuff.
Yeah, it's not me either, but I'd be more than happy to look into it for you, Pete, if you'd like. As I mentioned, we have a sister agency, the Division of Property Taxation. I do not work there. And so anything I say, please take with a grain of salt. With that being said, there was a bill that was passed several years ago that addressed a taxation for manufactured homes. And I believe that it covered basically pre-1976 mobile homes. It covers HUD code manufactured homes. And even though it wasn't clearly written this way, I would argue it also covers modular homes. So that is an interesting point that you raised. This bill does not address that particular statute. I will leave it up to Representative Kipp if she wants to see if tiny homes as created in this bill would also be addressed in that other law. And I don't remember the specific citation. I can find that for you, Representative Kipp, and send it to you.
Yeah, and Pete, if you wouldn't mind emailing me that question just to make sure that we get you an answer, that would be helpful.
Be happy to.
Great, thank you. Okay, last call. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We will keep you apprised if you feel the need to have another conversation, whatever. The bill is supposed to get introduced. If it gets introduced with some of the language in it, I don't know that I'm going to be able to send it back to the drafters before it gets introduced, but know that the changes that we've already talked about, we can make in the first committee. So that is more than likely what's going to happen. So the draft you see here is probably what's going to be introduced, and then we will change it in the first committee. Maybe they'll get us a pre-amended version so that you can read through it more easily. But that's kind of the process here. I expect it was initially supposed to be introduced this week, so it may be. I will have to check in with my leadership tomorrow and see what's going on with that. But that's sort of the process. Then it will get assigned to a committee. It'll have a hearing in that committee. If there's a fiscal note, I'm not sure if we have we'll be getting a fiscal note, and that will mean and it depends on if it has to go to other committees as well. It'll have to pass through the House, and then it'll go through the same entire process in the Senate, and then hopefully the governor will sign it. So that's sort of the process that we're going through. So it's probably at least a few weeks. So in the meantime, don't hesitate to get your feedback back to us, because we're more than happy to listen. Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful night. Thank you, Mo and Eric, for staying so late. I really appreciate it. And thank you to my aide, Flint, as well, for, I think, sticking around. Thank you.
Yeah, no
Flint.
problem. I'm still here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Flint.
Yeah, no
Appreciate your
problem.
help. Thanks, Kathy, Mo, and
I'll pop my email in the
Eric.
chat.
thank you. Take care. We're all done.
Thank you. Have a good one. Talk soon.
You too.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.